Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy podcast, a weekly podcast whose mission is multifaceted. Each week when you tune in, you will find episodes that question best practices, challenge music education dogma, facilitate conversations about touchy topics, demonstrate pedagogies, and conversations where colleagues learn from each other. This is episode 283, Beyond the Buzzwords, live at Southwest ACDA. A one-of-a-kind event happened at the 2026 convention of the Southwest region of American Choral Directors. I was invited to gather a panel of thoughtful professionals and an inquisitive crowd of colleagues and had an unsafe conversation in public. And what do you know? No one threw tomatoes. Are we speaking a language our communities that we serve actually understand? In this special live episode, recorded at SWACDA, we move past the performative, curated consensus of the professional bubble and the convention ecosystem. For 7 years, Choralosophy has been a space for the conversations we're often disincentivized from having, and this panel is no exception. I was joined in Albuquerque by Odell Zeigler, Clelyn Chapin, Heather Orr, and Reginal Wright for a lively and informative discussion you won't want to miss. We dive deep into the terminology that defines our field. Terms like excellence, rigor, access, equity, and much more. These words matter, but through overuse or lack of clear definitions, they risk becoming social signals rather than clear objectives. If we can't define what we mean to the normal people, the parents, the administrators, the singers, the taxpayers who sustain our programs, we risk losing them entirely. In this episode, we will tackle the existential threat of insular language, whether excellence and access always align, what is equity, and talking about navigating the tensions of gender balance and repertoire origins with nuance instead of reaction. So tune in and have your thinking stimulated and challenged, and as always, participate in the conversation either over on the Substack or at the Choralosopher's Facebook page. We really do want to hear from you and have you join our conversation. Choir directors, music educators, show planners, you pour your heart into your music. Shouldn't your events get the same attention? That's where Ludus comes in. Sell tickets, promote your concerts, and fundraise with ease. Selling merchandise and concessions? Ludus Retail makes in-person sales effortless. Running choir camps or workshops? They have a classes feature that keeps registration simple, and when you need help, the live support team is ready to pop up with real answers from real people. The best part? It's completely free for organizations. Thousands of music programs already trust Ludus because great music deserves more than just a ticketing system. Ensemble trips can be more than just a performance. They can build community, inspire artistry, and give students a reason to stay invested. That's why I recommend Kaleidoscope Adventures. For more than 30 years, Kaleidoscope has helped student groups travel with purpose, combining performance opportunities with experiences that deepen musical understanding and create lifelong memories. They'll help you find the right destination, the right venue, and the right balance of music, education, and fun. And they manage the planning from start to finish so you can focus on your job as an educator. To explore options for your choir, visit mykatrip.com or find the link in the show notes. A big shout out goes to the producers and Inner Circle over at the Patreon page. These are folks that are really dedicated to keeping the lights on here at this show. Venture Studios, Chandler Smith, Brian Long, Michael Herron, Kyle Peterson, Steve and Kathy Kakachik, David Kowalczyk, Max Jackson, Angie Schilling, Rebecca Chalk, RJ McCracken, Michael Shimp, and Kyle Siddons.
Well, hello everybody. Thanks for coming. My name's Chris, and I'm just really excited that you're here. If it's okay, can you hear me from where I'm standing? We'll pass a mic around for the panelists here in a little bit, but I'm just going to get started. One of the things that's very unnatural for me is to speak from a script with a time limit. So pardon me, because I've got some notes of how to set this up. I'm used to just winging it on the podcast. So one of the things that I want to do before we get into the topics of our discussion today is to frame this event for really what it is and why it matters. First, thanks to Jonathan Owen, who came up with the idea for this session and invited me to do this. It means a lot to get a chance to talk with colleagues. I love talking with colleagues. And as you can see, we are recording this conversation, which will later be an episode on the Choralosophy podcast, which has been going now for 7 years, uninterrupted, week after week. My audience and I have had the privilege of hearing from leaders in the teaching profession, the choral conducting profession, in composition, COVID doctors, scholars of race and racism, psychologists, neuroscientists, and much more. We have talked through cultural shifts, political upheaval, pandemic shutdowns, pandemic revivals of the art form, and we've been talking every week through all of that, including professional disagreements and spats and a lot of internal debate within our own field. In that time, those types of conversations have been both celebrated and criticized. It's been misunderstood, it's been clipped, it's been passed around, and it's gone viral. But the mission of what we do on the Choralosophy podcast has not budged, and that is doing what we're doing today. Colleagues getting together and talking about the things that actually matter, the things that matter to us every day when we go to our jobs and when we face real human children, as I like to say. We are not here to come up with a curated consensus. We're certainly not here in the business of saying the right things. In fact, the presentation is about buzzwords, because what buzzwords oftentimes do is mean something different to you than they mean to me. And oftentimes we have that conversation and nobody pauses to talk about what that word actually means to them, and an argument or a disagreement will then ensue. So we're just going to have a conversation, because I really believe that if we can't talk to each other honestly, then the tensions that are shaping choral education, the things that we are facing, then someone else is going to define those tensions for us. And it will probably not be a choir director. It will probably be a politician, or it will be somebody who controls a budget, or it will be a superintendent, or those types of things. We have to be able to advocate for our art form. And we have to use words that compel and words that persuade. So that's why today matters. We like to think that we are operating like in a professional bubble. For example, we come to these conferences and we are going to talk to people who know what our world is like, and of course we love that, right? We love coming to these events where we know we're going to get to talk to somebody who gets it. However, the people who we interact with in our real world, in our day-to-day lives, oftentimes don't get it. So they're the ones that we need to learn to communicate with. They are the normal people. They are the parents, the administrators, the school boards, the donors, if you're running a nonprofit, the taxpayers in your district, and of course the singers. We are beholden to them, and to be able to explain why our art form is valuable and why our educational offerings are valuable is really important. So if our language stays insular, meaning if our language starts to form certain buzzwords that are only meaningful within choral professionals talking to other choral professionals, then I'm afraid we might miss the boat as the world continues to change. So I'm going to start, since I'm all about definitions of terms, I'm going to start defining the term buzzword, because that's the first buzzword that I've used so far today. A buzzword is a word or phrase that becomes extremely popular over a short period, often within specific professional or cultural niche. While these terms usually start with a precise meaning, they often lose their substance through overuse, eventually becoming a shorthand for social signaling. I am in the choir teacher group. I use the word this way. And that they stop then becoming useful for clear communication. So we have a lot of buzzwords in education right now. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of them. I just wrote down a few here, but there are many, and I'm sure there's a lot in your districts. Excellence, rigor, standards, inclusion, diversity, student-centered, inquiry-based. You're hearing all of these types of things, and oftentimes they have a specific meaning that probably started in some academic paper and then got shared a bunch of places and then got to it in the hands of an administrator somewhere, and then it became policy. But we don't always know what it means. So some examples. When we say excellence, what are we actually talking about? Are we talking about a perfect festival score, or are we talking about a community impact? Those could be both done excellently. But when we use the term, we should probably be clear. When we say rigor, do we mean deep, disciplined, furrowed brow thinking in a classroom? Or do we mean students following orders? Those might be two different things, and sometimes the word gets used in both ways. Our standards that we use, that we teach, are they fixed or are they evolving? These aren't just semantic games. These are the definitions that are the DNA of what we do. It's how we hire within school districts and how the public sees us, and even how school district leaders shape policy. It's my belief that if we don't come up with some common definitions and communicate them clearly, then we might get run over. So we're going to start here with this awesome panel here. And now that I've kind of set up some of these ideas that we're going to be discussing today, and I'm hopeful then that as you are listening to us have a conversation, which is, I've been coaching them, this is supposed to be a conversation, not a presentation. So we're going to have a conversation, and if you've got ideas buzzing in your brain about things that you'd like to add to the conversation, we will have some time at the end. So, for example, I'm going to start with one more and then we'll jump over here because I noticed it this morning. I saw about 30-something amazing pieces of choral music this morning, for those of you who were over there at the session. So, for example, I saw music from, I want to say, every continent that is inhabited by humans. No Antarctica represented that I remember this morning, but maybe next time, maybe at National, we'll have some Antarctica representation. However, and so we would say that is a diverse morning of choral music. But I only saw 2 composers that were not alive. And 2 of them, 3 songs, 2 of them were Palestrina. So that's, when I think of diversity, I include time, right? So that's one difference right there. Sometimes some people don't include that when they use the word diversity. I think of it as diversity because, my goodness, I've lived in the same town for 30 years. The culture in my town 30 years ago, a very different culture than it is now. Culture changes over time too, not just place. So are we giving our students a truly diverse and rich time span of music education? To me, that's included. Maybe it's not for you. So that's just an example of the types of things that I'd like to discuss today. So before we dig into the meat of this, everybody, introduce yourself. Who are you?
Clelyn Chapin, and I teach at the University of Northern Colorado.
Odell Zeigler, I teach high school choir at Booker T. Washington High School in Norfolk, Virginia.
Right, I teach at Baylor University.
And Heather Orr, and I am now at Texas A&M University.
All right, so basically what I've got here for these folks to discuss is 3 different prompts, and we're going to start with the first one, and then I'm going to kind of keep a running clock, so about 15 minutes or so for each prompt, and then at the end, like I said, there will be an audience question response. Join the conversation time if you feel brave enough. Ian, where's Ian? Ian's got a microphone. He'll run around to people that they can record as well their questions when we get there. Okay, guys, the first prompt. What do we really mean by excellence, rigor, and standards? You don't have to grab all those words, but if one jumps out at you, in the choral classroom. And do these things exist in harmony or in tension with other goals related to access and inclusion? Is there a tension there or not? Who wants to jump in?
Yeah, I think we can agree that in the right balance that these goals are actually supportive of one another rather antagonistic if it's in the correct balance. Like if you think your gut bacteria, you have different kinds of gut bacteria and they keep a really healthy environment as long as one bacteria doesn't overtake the other. But everybody has a different kind of makeup depending on what their diet is or what part of the world that they're in. And so the different balance that makes for a happy ecosystem in their bodies might be different. And so whenever we're talking about what the right balance is, we have to look contextually at what our choir is for, what the community around our choir wants, what the singers want, what the director wants. And when we can find the line of best fit with all of those, I think we find that they're not antagonistic to one another.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Good answer.
Yeah, you got another mic over there.
I really love that. My question to you, though, I think it's really important that we define them, because I think the balancing piece, I think, is something that we could somewhat be on, common ground. I think we all believe that, we should balance these things. But the question for me is, how do you define excellence? In your words, and I'm just curious. It's not,
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that has to do with the collective values of the community. And so in my collegiate context, like there's certain repertoire that's appropriate and desirable for a college, but that's also going to vary from semester to semester. So when I think about rigor, I'm thinking about what is the degree of growth that's happening from the baseline of when they first walk in to my ensemble on day 1 of the semester, the level of engagement, enthusiasm, outside work that they put in, that's my rigor and my excellence. And because the makeup is going to be different, the desires are going to be different, the types of projects that we're doing in that semester are going to be different, then I have to be very flexible about how I do define those. I think what's important is having a process, especially for young teachers, to figure out like, how do we gather this collective information and assess it, and then make some decisions that we communicate out to the ensemble and enforce from there. So that's my non-answer way of answering your question.
Go ahead.
I was going to, because when you spoke about excellence, this is just something that brings a lot of memories back to me. So for the past 30 years, I've taught high school. Okay, and so this is my first year in the collegiate realm. And my first year of teaching inner city for 6 years, And we had a clinician in. We met on a Saturday morning and we had this rehearsal. And it was, it was definitely something. And the kids worked so hard. And the clinician said, wow, now the school had never gotten a sweepstakes or a first division. So he said, you are excellent. And every kid goes, because in Texas, excellent is a 2. And they thought, we're going to get a 2 now. And so they didn't realize that. And I said, well, they're sad because they really wanted to get a superior rating this year. And that's what I told the clinician. He said, no, they're superior. They're superior. No, you're superior. And told the kids. So we all do have a different idea of what excellent is. Because in Texas, excellence is actually a Division 2 and superior is a Division 1. I think excellence, though, is really, it's in rigor. It's setting that level, that standard of what we want, and then holding our kids accountable and teaching our kids to hold each other accountable so that we can all achieve these goals. Because I really believe that whatever level we set, whatever we say, this is what we want, and I need you to be on my team and be part of my community so that we can reach this level of excellence. We can have that rigor, and it will be so much more fun when you're good. And so, and that's what I like to say. A lot of times the kids, it's just so fun. If we can get there, it's so fun. And then we just work together for that. So that's what I'm thinking about when I think of rigor and excellence. But I just thought that was interesting when you said we all have these buzzwords, and where those kids, well, I guess now it's 30 years ago, they're not kids anymore, but they didn't have the same idea of what excellence meant.
Okay, so I've been teaching not as long as you, but I'm right there at you. See, this is 26 for me. But there's this phrase that I stole from some kids that says there's levels to this. So I judged in San Antonio last weekend at this insane choir event called the Magical Festival. If you ever get an opportunity, you need to go and do it. It will redefine, make you redefine your existence as a teacher. But anyway, every group that came across that stage was a first division group if we were judging it on a contest standard. But within that first division, there were groups that were, okay, this is a 1 because they checked all the boxes. And then there are groups that were, this is not even a 1. Like this is like a -16. But the lowest we can get, the lowest grade we can give is the 1. And so there's levels in between that, but it's all excellent. And so I think the reason why I'm at Baylor now is to try to close the door of teachers quitting within the first 5 years of teaching. Where this, in my opinion, where I think this comes is when teachers look at the standards based on the situation that they're in and then compare it to the standards based on the situation that you're in. So in my situation, it may not be as good as your situation, but compared to where we were last week, we're 10 times better. To me, that's excellence. Like we're getting better each day. And when students or young teachers or teachers in general don't see that type of thing happening, it's very discouraging. So what I'm thinking is excellent when I go to a Mad Fest and then I hear a group like Heather's. But am I excellent? Yeah, in my community, I'm excellent. We achieve the things that we meant to achieve. And so I think when we look at it, we need to not paint it with such a broad brush and then just define it to where individuals can operate in the areas that I teach at Baylor, that God put them in so that they could do the mission in the place that they're at a specific time.
If I can, thank you for that. I really appreciate that, your statement. So I've had to define it for my students. And I've had to take it away from the ideal of assessments or this ideal of comparing it to something. So for me, I've simplified excellence for my students that it's something that's visible, it's audible, and it's about growth. And so regardless of what your score is at the assessments, you know what excellent means for yourself, right? And they're like, yes. And they can say it back to me, visible, audible, right? It's growth. And then rigor, and I hope we can be common ground here, but again, it's a conversation. I think we can agree maybe that rigor is really not about difficulty or punishing, right? So for me, when I think about rigor, I teach my students that it's this ideal of, and you talked about it, Clelyn, consistency and accountability over time. That's how I define rigor. Now, granted, it's great to have exercises and teach in a way that should be yielding to Bloom's taxonomy, right? Higher order thinking skills, all those things, great. You should do those things. But for me, it's really about holding students accountable and being consistent in how I do those things. So that's rigor for me. And then the standard for me, again, it's not really, I think tension comes when we try to tell people how to get there, right? Right? The path there may be different, right? But we'll get there. So for me,
it definitely does depend on who you're working with at the time. You know, your 9th grade tenor bass choir coming in, everyone on the riser at the same time with their music, and they all have a pencil. I mean, all right,
that's excellent.
You're excellent.
You're there, baby.
You've done it. You know, but then, you know, there's definitely different standards there that were exactly what you just talked about.
Yeah.
Now, I wonder, guys, if we could think about like a very specific, because of course we're all music teachers, we're vocal music teachers, a very specific music-related definition of excellence that we use. Odell's comment kind of sparked this. Because I agree, the way I explain excellence to my kids, it has nothing to do, no offense, with any of you or your choirs. Like, I'm not talking to them about your choirs. I'm talking to them about what we can do and what we should be able to do. And they have very specific goals related to their literacy growth and their vocal technical growth and their ability to sing an ah vowel or, you know, all these types of things. And so we measure excellence based on those standards, but that might not be the same vowel you teach your choirs. But I don't really care. Like, it's the whole point is that we're getting really good at the thing we're doing in our class. Does that make sense to anybody? Feel free to respond to that.
If you're teaching in an optimal situation, I spent my first 10 years teaching in Fort Worth ISD with mostly minority students. The standards, it's the same standard, yeah, but because of where my students came from, I personally feel like if we use the standards in our classroom at the contest, they wouldn't be successful at the contest. So in the hood, we have to teach our kids how to choral code switch. Because the way that these kids sing during the week is not the way that these kids sing on Sunday. So I'm teaching the students where they are, but I also have to teach the kids we have to assimilate to where we're going. And so in that type of situation, I also try to show that excellence, it's bigger than music. It's your life. Do you show up on time? Do you say thank you? Do you number your measures? Do you put the pencil back? Do you put your folder back at the end of class? Do you come back and pick up the trash in the building? Do you help the custodians? So yes, and if you're doing it musically, then it carries through the rest of your life. But what you're saying is correct in optimal situations, but in different situations, sometimes you have to do things a little differently.
Whether you've newly discovered the show or you're a longtime listener, I would like to encourage you to become a paid subscriber, either on Patreon or Substack. Each works as a way for you to financially support this show and has different pros and cons, but in both subscription locations, you'll have access to my Google Drive, behind-the-scenes episodes, a direct line of communication to me that I will prioritize, and more importantly, it makes sure that I can keep doing this show forever. Those supporters are the reason that I'm able to do this show as a job and sustain it and treat it like a content generation machine for your benefit. So I would encourage you to head over there to either patreon.com/Choralosophy or choralosophy.substack.com and become a paid subscriber today.
And I teach in a similar setting like that now, but I think that goes back to this idea of a standard, right? And so we can't confuse the destination with the route. You know what I'm saying? So the path there may be different. It's still the standard. And again, I don't alter the standard. I don't change the standard. But we may get there a different way. So some of the things you were saying, I agree. But I will say this. Students will rise to the standard. I would say that. And when you set the standard, they'll rise to it. One thing I found early on in my career is lowering the standard or trying to change the standard. Yeah. So I keep it high. In fact, I'll even try to increase it. Now, no pun, I'm not talking about rigor, but I will even try to increase the standard. Because the idea is that they all could reach the standard. It's just how will they get there? So that's the big question.
Yeah, they can do so much more than they know they can do. So it's up to us, of course, to set that goal.
And I was going to say, just with that standard, it just has to be the accountability, where being consistent and holding the kids accountable to that standard every single time, even when it's hard. And sometimes we miss the mark. Sometimes we we don't achieve what we want to in a rehearsal, or sometimes they aren't able to do the passages that we had prepared to teach that day. But it's holding them accountable and coming back with another plan so that we can achieve that excellence the next day or achieve it the next day, but always keeping that standard where it's at and then continuing to raise it, because the kids will meet it. Wherever we want them to get to, they're going to get there as long as we set that example for them.
I would like to make it a little messy. Why is this the word that we're talking about when all of us have like these very beautiful, idealistic things to say about them, which are all true? And yet there's a lot of tension in this word because we naturally compare ourselves to one another in the profession. And I would just like to point out that that's actually a really good thing. I do love aspirational choirs where you can go look and be like, what can I learn? But we do have some baggage around not feeling enough. Younger teachers wanting their groups to be able to perform the type of repertoire that gets performed at Southwest ACDA, and then feeling bad, and instead of saying like, hey, you've got a lot of steps to grow as an educator before you can get to the level that you can have a choir that can do that. And so I think as a personal goal, we have to really figure out how to balance acceptance of where we are at, because what we're doing is wonderful no matter what. Wherever you are at in your teaching career, you're doing a good thing, and your students' lives are likely better for having you in them. And at the same time, like, it's pretty boring to not get better. I think that because of the comparative nature, we often take an unhealthy approach to that. Instead of saying, you know what, I just compared myself to this choir, and I'm so excited about what I have to learn and how I can grow. Instead of taking it personally and being like, well, you know, they're only able to perform that choir or that well because they have this amount of money in their program, or because their county had a tax levy, because that's like shame speaking instead of hope and acceptance and aspiration. And that's what I hope that we can work on with our young teachers.
And I definitely, it's celebrating where you're at and celebrating what's happening in front of you, and celebrating the small things that are happening in rehearsals and with students. And I think that's really important, and celebrating each other in that. I know I look at it when I see someone who is really succeeding and doing great, I'm going, okay, they're proven it's possible. I can do that. I can do it. It's not a thing out of jealousy or spite. It's okay, they've opened the road for me. They've opened the door. Okay, they're doing that with high school. Okay, I can look at that. I can do that. So I think it's just taking other people's accomplishments and celebrating them, and rejoicing that they're making it happen, and then studying what they're doing and how can I apply that to myself too.
Awesome, thank you. I'm going to be the bad guy and move us to another topic now. So since Clelyn decided to make it messy, I think I'll just keep making it messier. We're going to talk about sex and gender. I know. So we have other, for example, another buzzword would be equity. That means something different. Well, it means something different to your mortgage loan officer than it does to your school district administrator. And of course, with gender, we have, I would say, two elephants in the room in choral music related to gender equity. And I think there might be a tension between them, but also I think they might be more related than a lot of us understand. So one of those would be, we don't have enough boys in choir. That's one. I would call them demographically underserved by our profession. That's how I would phrase it, because if we are to look at the demographics of our room and ask ourselves who is not there, and then ask what we are doing to get them there, then that's a pretty big demographic gap. But then, of course, at the other end of the profession, that's the student end of the profession, the younger access to the classroom. But then at the other end of the profession, we've got collegiate conducting positions and honor choir positions, mostly dominated by men. And women, there's an equity disparity there on the other end too. And I think obviously those are both such extremely complicated topics, but I think there's a connection that I don't often oftentimes hear us voice out loud. And one of them is that I think that if boys didn't feel so dang special in our class all the time, maybe we wouldn't end up taking over all the choirs when we get to be adults. I mean, I think about like how fluffed the ego has to be sometimes for a boy to join one of our choirs. And if that equity was addressed more, maybe they were one of the 40 tenors that had to try out, because my girls have to fight so hard to get into my chamber choir. The boys just have to not get in trouble. And so does that translate down the road? That's just one of my many thoughts on this. So feel free to jump into either end or both of these. Yeah, go ahead.
Just to address, so I'm working on my doctorate right now, and one of the papers I just had to write was very similar to this question. And what I realized through it was I need, now that I'm in the collegiate world, I've always been mentors for people in the high school world, but now that I'm in the collegiate world, I need female mentors and I need them in the university realm, because I'm the only female in my building. So band, choir, orchestra, and mariachi, and I'm the only female conductor, other than the 2 administrative assistants. So it's definitely, I'm alone, and that's something where I wrote in this paper, there needs to be more female mentors for university professors.
So patriarchy is bad for everybody, and it doesn't matter if you're a boy or a girl or non-binary. It is, and I think that we are better at employing practices that are less hierarchical and less patriarchal when we are working with treble choirs and giving them lots of empowering music, which is wonderful, and we should do that. We have community building. We tend to be more collaborative, in my experience, with treble choirs, partly because they are better at doing it with more development in the prefrontal cortex, and they are socialized to be more aware of social cues. So we have all of these great things going on with our treble ensembles, and then we're like, here's the sea shanty. And a lot of times the practices that we employ in our treble ensembles, like community building, teaching social emotional skills, creating a less hierarchical space, are really great for our tenors and basses if we would just help them learn those practices. When I started teaching my tenors and basses the exact same way that I taught my sopranos and altos, all of a sudden I was having breakthroughs. I remember teaching Song of Myself by Michael John Trotta and letting them chair, what is a time that you were larger and better than you thought? And one boy, Smoothie, goes, well, when I was singing to my grandma on her deathbed, that was a moment. I didn't think I could do that. I felt awkward, but then that was a meaningful send-off to her. And that started to really change the dynamic in my tenor bass choirs. And I'll just give another, on the flip side, at the same time that this was happening, my top group became my treble ensemble. That feels like not equity-based, okay, but these were the best students. I didn't call them that, but everybody knew that they were the best. Spawned jealousy, that spawned motivation. So I think if we are just thinking about best breast practices.
That too.
Yes. Best practices. Glad you got that one recorded. Great. Best practices for everybody, then we're going to end up in happier places across the profession.
Okay, I think I came from a standpoint of privilege in terms of tenor, bass, or men's choirs, just because I could relate to them so well. I was naturally athletic, and so I could attract those types of students. And then we put great teaching around that, and we built a community that basically supported people, whether they were an athlete or where they were a math nerd or whatever you are. And what we basically did is we created like an ecosystem inside our room to where we could all benefit from each other's strengths. So sometimes the guy that can bench 350 has a hard time with the quadratic equation. Well, this gentleman over here that can barely lift a 20-pound barbell, he can do the quadratic equation in his sleep. So we created an ecosystem to where we all benefited from each other's strengths. And so the mantra in my tenor and bass choir was this scripture, and I didn't tell them it was a scripture. I just told them it was just a wise saying, iron sharpens iron as one person sharpens another. And so that's how we built it. And so I started at my last high school with 9 tenors and basses. And when I resigned in 2023, 120, just literally based off of that. And we sang music and in the words of like NBA coaches, we sang music the right way. And then we had a community outside of that supported each other as humans as well as musicians.
Yeah. Well, I was going to comment on both of those. I remember years and years ago that I said, my choirs, it's not, my girls are always so successful. My girls do so well, my treble choirs. I don't understand why my mixed choir isn't doing as well. And so, and what I was told was, as soon as you start focusing on your boys, you're going to have a great mixed choir. And I thought, oh, but they're so hard. It's so hard. And so that's what I did, though. As I started working with the boys, I became the lead teacher of the boys and started working with them. And I brought someone in, and I said, I just don't. It's so different to teach them tone and he said, why? Just teach them how to sing. I was like, the same way? Yeah. He said, how is breathing different? How is teaching, what are you wanting differently from your boys that you wouldn't want from your girls? I was like, okay. And so I started teaching them the same way that I taught my girls and holding them accountable, just as accountable. And all of a sudden, the mixed choir then became exactly what I wanted it to be and far exceeded my expectations. So I think holding the boys to the same standard as the girls is super important. Definitely. There shouldn't be one level for one group and one level for the other. Everyone is capable of meeting it.
Well, I'd like to first start, let me say this, fundamental grounding to this, equity, right? So one of the words, buzzwords, my response to anyone who used the word, I always asked, well, how about the opposite? So for example, when an administrator says to a teacher, it's not fair to remove the student from your class because now they're not learning. Well, is it fair for the student to remain in class and impede upon others that are learning? So, but to answer, that's just a fundamental grounding. I'll share this because it's really a sensitive topic, and I don't really talk too much about gender imbalance. I believe, and maybe it's old-fashioned, it's traditionalist, I do believe that boys need to see singing from men that they, model singing from men. That's me. And if you look at this question and other things, if you think about it from an individual to a collective approach, it'll answer a lot of our questions. I'm not going to backtrack to the other question, but from an individual to a collective approach, it'll answer a lot of our questions. And what I mean by that is, when you study voice, one-on-one voice lessons, we always talk the benefits of a male student pairing up with a male voice teacher. Vice versa, female pairing up with a female voice teacher. But we get to the choir world, it's like, but then we call the opposite gender in to help us on the struggling, maybe section that we may not be as comfortable with, right? So for me, when I first started teaching, I remember always calling in sopranos, mezzo-sopranos, because I needed help with my treble choir. Because I'm like, I cannot model that. I can, a little bit, but I want it to be healthy. So for me, it's just about being honest. It's about access, mentorship. But again, I think I'm a little more old-fashioned when it comes to that. And I also think that masculinity should not be treated as something that needs to be softened or apologized for.
Well, yeah. In fact, I want to respond to that one. Okay, so I think that that's actually one of the biggest causes of the lack of boys in choir. Of all of them, actually, is that masculine boys oftentimes do not see this as a place for me because it's not reflected in their culture, in what they're being told by their male friends they need to do in order to be there. I know for me it's a passion point because it's why my son quit choir, because I'm assuring him that when he gets to high school in a class of all guys, that you can really just be yourself. But that is such a huge disparity. And one of the things that's actually really interesting, probably about 2 years ago, I did an episode with a psychologist who did his research, his specialty research was on the emotional connection for young boys in puberty. So how they connect with their authentic emotional self, that was his research area. And he came on, and it got some interesting response. One, it had somebody call me the Joe Rogan of choir podcasters online because we were talking about the lack of men in our space, the lack of masculinity and healthy masculinity. And it was very frustrating for me because as a kid who grew up the son of a baseball coach and a varsity athlete who was in Carla Oliver's men's choir with all the other football players and all the other athletes that were in our school, that space, that was not an issue for me. But I see that is now become an issue issue for my students, where they look at choir as a place where I have to convince the athletes, I have to convince the masculine boys. So I think that's something that I'm seeing reflected across the profession. Just not sure if any of you guys see it. I think that's kind of what you're getting at.
Definitely. I mean, hit them around the head. And one of the benefits of me was that I was coaching in my building. I was coaching basketball. And so had no problem getting male athletes in there, football players, basketball players, baseball players. But again, I just, for me, they have to see, and I always healthy to describe the adjective, healthy masculinity. They have to see it. And when there's healthy masculinity, you will get boys to join. And I think, and also even from an early age, right? I think early age, start with elementary school, a lot of times, you can find that a lot of general music teachers usually are not male, But I just think even middle school, I just think from an early age, they need to see representation that, and model men that they respect. So
I think there is definitely a difference between men and women on like hormonal and chemical, like all sorts of levels. So just to clarify that, when I'm talking about like teaching your boys the same as your girls, but there is like a lot of weight and baggage with the word masculinity right now, which I would love to see redefined and reshaped, or if we can come up with a different word altogether to take some of the weight out of it. I do think that coming up with values that are not gendered, that we don't assign values as traditionally feminine or as traditionally masculine, but say like, hey, strength is a wonderful thing to pursue regardless of your gender. Here's an example of a really strong person. Being a protector is a great aspiration regardless of how you were born. And see how many different types of people that we can hold up in front of our students, and then let them decide, well, those are the values that really speak to me, rather than just saying like, well, here is the version of healthy masculinity. And if that they happen to be a dude, but the traditional masculine characteristics don't apply to them, then they don't feel pressured to conform to that particular model, and they can go take a look at someone different over there. I think we need to be showing a variety of options and ways for our students to be like wonderful, healthy people.
That's just a tough question. So different versions of masculinity. So can you can kind of expound upon that?
Yeah. I mean, I think like the version that scares a lot of women is like the toxic podcast bro sort of stereotype. I'm just going to see how many times I can step in it in this recording. Where like sort of the Machiavellian might makes right. And my husband is a professional sports bettor, so I encounter a lot of people in this very weird world. And so when I think of like that type of toxic masculinity, which happens to be like one cultural ideal that is being held up very publicly, and we need more like healthy masculine dudes to go get some podcasts. Thank you.
See, this thing about the circles, and I get what you said, and I respect it, and I agree. But how do you define, in my opinion, like healthy masculinity, or because according to who's?
Can I take that? Can I take that?
Yeah.
That question?
Yeah.
So I got distracted from this earlier. So the psychologist that came on to answer that exact question, and by the way, you also mentioned coming up with a different word. The term he used is authentic masculinity, meaning just in the same way that the ah vowel I teach my choir is not going to be the same one you teach your choir, and they can still both be excellent. One man's version of what their own masculinity is going to be different than another man's. What matters to the mental health and emotional connection of young men and boys is that they are not having to change their sense of their own masculinity to meet the definition of another person's. The smallest minority on the planet is the individual. And so, do we see those things being able to be authentically reflected?
Well, I was just going to say the adjectives you used. What did you, or the description?
Strength, protector.
Which, ironically, they're neutral.
Yes.
Because that can a protector can definitely be female, you know, the strength can be a female, same as male. So I think that's interesting, even just choosing those words in particular.
All right, next topic, or do you want to keep cooking? If you want to cook, you can cook.
Thank you for sharing that. I would say this.
You know what? To end that little session, I want to say good teaching is good teaching. And that is like, regardless who you have in front of you, good teaching is good teaching.
I will say this, and I can say this in 10 seconds. When I stopped teaching them like boys and girls and just started teaching them as humans, that's when I had to shift.
Yeah, absolutely. As individuals. Okay, so the next topic, the next buzzword is diversity. I hinted at it earlier, time diversity, for example. And of course, with our repertoire, the origins of where our repertoire comes from matters. Power differentials in society matter. But I would suggest that rejecting something just because of those things is also not really the answer either. It's a reaction, it becomes reactionary. Normal people, so this is kind of taking back to my early, like normal people that are not in our choir buzzword ecosystem, they see diversity everywhere they look because they oftentimes don't have the same academic influence of how these words are being used. So one of my big things that I think is really important is to make sure that we are, and when we're engaging with our students as individuals, as humans, that we're not locking ourselves into a definition of diversity that is something you can only see in a photograph. Because most of I would say most of what makes us who we are things you cannot see in a photograph, and that has to be included in diversity. So the prompt here is, with our repertoire and also with our interactions with each other, are we really approaching diverse repertoire and diversity in a nuanced way? Or is it possible that we are coming past a period of an overcorrection where we are dealing with each other in a very social media kind of way that shuns nuance related to this word? And if anyone wants to throw out their own definition, since I already did of this word, they can do that too.
Definition for diversity. For me, it's a celebration of lived experiences. Those are in your class. Celebrating the experiences of those you teach. That's just, and I'm trying to simplify it so that it doesn't become so. So for me, when it comes to diversity, though, it only becomes a problem in the choral space repertoire when it is treated symbolically and not musically. So, and that's really the only issue I have with it. Some people, they'll try to pick it apart. For me, if you're being intentional about programming and there's a pedagogical reason and you have a pedagogical approaches to teaching it, you're good. But if you're just doing it just to check off a box, that's the only issue. That's all I have on this question. So.
That's pretty much it in a nutshell.
Go ahead.
I think this is another one of those answers that has to be really contextual. I think the beauty of our discipline is that it leaves a lot of room for people's weird little pet interests. And some people just really freaking love Brahms, and some people don't, okay? Depending on what your community looks like and what your community values are, you need to be making programming choices based out of that. And so I think, like with Jordan High School today, if you were at that concert, you saw some very clear intentional choices based on that community of what they were programming. And would I want them to give up a single one of those pieces so they could perform Mozart? Like, heck no. But for professional groups that focus on early music and have attracted an audience and a community that really wants to hear like Bach and Purcell all the time, am I going to say like, well, where's your world music? No, because that's not the purpose and the value of that ensemble. And so I think we kind of have to trust the conductor to make good choices for their own environment. And there's so much good music in the world. It's like, how can we possibly perfectly balance a diet with all of the access that we have to regional world music? And is a balanced diet in that way even desirable depending on the context you're in? I think that's a conversation that you have to have with your choir and your community and make choices accordingly.
Excellent.
I also think it's our job to teach and to teach our community and to widen their knowledge of music. Because if we only introduce things to them or present things to them that they already know, then we're not doing music a service. And I remember my first year of teaching inner city, same group, okay, then when I went there and I just finished my master's at Ohio State and multiculturalism, and we learned Sia Hamba together. And so I was like, I'm going to teach Sia Hamba to these, the kids are going to love it. And right before the concert, they said, I'll never forget Kevin Hansford. Okay, he said, Ms. Orr, can we ever sing that other stuff, that back stuff? And I said, Bach? And yeah. I said, well, you want to? Yeah, that'd be tight. You know what? Learn it from the babes, So I think that tells us a lot. And we can't just give them what they're used to and what they want. We need to open their eyes to a whole new world. Because I know the first time I heard, Vivaldi's Winter, I was like, oh yeah, this rocks. And so, and maybe you didn't have the same experience that I did, but that's something where when it was presented to me, new stuff gets presented, then it's exciting and it's invigorating. And that's what we can do for our kids and our families. When I taught high school, 30 years of high school, but just from where I came from, 24 years there, and I'd bring in a new piece, like a different style or something, parents would be so cool. That was really neat. I didn't know anything about that. And then they would look it up, So I think our job is to teach and to really widen people's knowledge of music.
I want to just respond to that. Thank you for sharing that. That was really good. In fact, when I took the job where I'm at now in Virginia, African American high school, one of the parents in Booster Club, she came to me and she said to me, "Now, what are you going to teach the kids?" And I said, "What do you mean?" I said, they'll learn how to read music, vocal, appropriate, technique. Please don't tell me you're going to just give them all gospel." And I'm so glad she said that to me, because I was not. In fact, what you said, I always do the opposite. I will give them the things of their culture and the things they experience. And I remember when I filled in for a maternity leave position. It was an affluent neighborhood, pretty much 99% Caucasians. I taught them gospel. They had a blast. And then the school I'm at now, I walked in with the buck and all the other stuff. They fell in love with it. But I did take a lot of criticism. There was a lot of criticism from every angle you can probably imagine it. Because the school I teach at, historically, they've only done spirituals and gospel. And so then my first 2 years, I don't think I did a spiritual gospel piece at all. But I was trying to open their, get them, just broaden their horizons, as you said. And ever since then, it's great feedback. So now I'm able to have more of a blended type of programming, more diverse programming. They get the spiritual, get the gospel, but we do a little bit of everything. But I think it's important what you said. And a lot of times in settings, we just go just one way. And
I'll help you out as the other African American on the panel. All right, so I dabble in composition just a little bit. In 2021, there was an online phenomena that happened with a composer that made a comment, and as a result of his comment, I've had enough commissions since then to probably fund me to 2030. And so I'm going back to talk about symbolism and in diversity and programming. And so when people will call me, I always ask the commissioner, okay, why are you choosing me? When we first used to do this, I used to turn the commissions down because they said, well, we wanted a composer from an underrepresented community. And that's a buzzword. So, we don't have enough time. And so from an underrepresented community. And my response used to always be, well, what do you think about my music? Because I don't want you to think of me as a black composer. I want you to think of me as a composer that just happens to be black. And so when we're looking at diversity, I think in terms of programming, I think good choral music is just good choral music throughout the entire canon. If it's good, it's good. Yeah. And we learned that with musicians like Lusitano in the Renaissance Baroque. If you listen to Lusitano, did you really know you weren't listening to Palestrina? Good music is good music. So in our pickings, I like the timeline approach that you use, where we represent the entire canon. And then, we want to we do want to represent female composers. We want to represent, composers of different ethnicities, but we want to do it because the music is good, not just because to check a color box.
Exactly, and I also like what Clelyn said earlier about trusting the conductors to make those decisions for their communities. I don't think we should ever come to a conference and judge a teacher's whole school year based on the 5 songs they chose for that conference. Right? Like they might have, because it's about the student experience over the course of the whole school year. It's not about, we're not programming for you. That's not why we do it. We program for the students. And so, of course, that's really important. And then the other thing I'll say about this before we want some questions from you guys too, is another buzz term or buzz expression that I hear a lot on this programming topic is that we want our kids to see themselves in the repertoire, which we do, but we also want to teach them to see themselves in each other and to see themselves in all repertoire. I think one of the more regressive or even, dare I say, racist ideas that you could express is to say that Palestrina has nothing to say to an inner city black kid because they're both humans and they're brothers and they have something to say to each other. And so that's, of course, that's where that nuanced part of this, I think everybody has expressed here. Okay, so if anyone has any questions or comments that they'd like to add to the conversation, you have really 2 options. You can, raise your hand. You can address each of us or one of us individually, or just you can throw a question out to the whole panel. And Ian will come bring over a microphone. We got one right here already. This is great. Now that microphone's not going to amplify you. It'll just record you. So just talk loud.
My first question is, how do we separate the art from the artist, their politics, their social, and the socioeconomic conditions that allow the artwork to exist in a way that minimizes the harm to the students? A lot of classical music, for example, has racial harm that can affect students of color, for example. And like, if we were to get rid of all classical music, which I don't want, we wouldn't have a lot of stuff to work with, but at the same time, that harm can still linger. So like, how do we separate that?
You first.
That comes also with being intentional about the way you research the music you do. So obviously, if you're researching something and it has a connotation, or you realize it's a piece that is, how you will define it, it's just racist, whatever, then you don't do it.
I mean, yes, but no.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead, sorry.
Like a certain time, like 1800s and like earlier, you get to a point where like everybody was like, that was the time period. Like, you can't, like, while I understand that, it doesn't resolve some of the kind of, like, kind of ability of the time. Like, if you're working as Mozart,
I think you can.
King makes his money through slavery or colonization, there is a level to that where he can't, like, separate the artist from its like from the harm that was required for that music to be made.
You're making it messy. You're trying to go back in a way, right? Trying to go back to the old composer, you're saying. If Mozart was affiliated with anything that was racist.
I mean, like, there's like Mozart, for example. There's Karl Orff, who like was a Puerto Jew, but he did work under the Nazis for a while, and that's like there's a conflict that exists in there.
What do you think, Odell, about, like, would this fit into the same category of the other things we were talking about, where each of us would have a different level of comfort with, or a different line, Yeah,
history makes things difficult.
So as teachers, if we call ourselves teachers, our first obligation is to do what? Teach. And so in order to teach, we have to and I think that we're collectively, this room, we're just as much history teachers as we are choral teachers. And so I think with that music, is Orff's music good? Yeah. Is Mozart's music good? Yeah. The situations that he was in, the situations that they were in were not formidable in today's lens, but I think it's incumbent upon us to teach the history of where this came from. If that's going to be offensive to your community, then I'm probably staying away from it in that community. Or if it's against my personal beliefs, then I stay away. But I think our first obligation is to teach, and then we wrap music around good teaching. That's the big issue with the spiritual, because most people wanted to do Stacey Gibbs at the end of the program because it's going to give you a standing ovation. But there's a group from Austin that sang in the conducting symposium yesterday, saying "Follow the Drinking Gourd." I am 100% positive that that teacher took time to teach these students about the North Star and how they followed the path to get out of slavery. And that's so we have to, I think we're history teachers. It's incumbent upon us to know the history, teach the history, and then wrap the music around that.
I think most of the harm done comes when students feel like they have the wool pulled over their eyes and that something is being imposed upon them based on kind of a false premise of like, well, now I'm going to give you the really good music. This is Mozart. This is the good music. Okay, false premise. Or not presenting it in context. I have gotten myself into trouble is when there was something that I didn't realize about a piece, and then a student went and Googled it and said, why would you give this to us? And I'm like, well, now I'm in trouble. If I have done the planning and the research to present this as a conversation, I actually find students are quite resilient to look at this and say, in 200 years, the music that we are performing now is also probably going to have some moral baggage around it, because when you know better, you do better, but when you don't know better, what are you going to do? And yet there's still like some amazing music being made during this time period that I hope people will get to experience eventually. But I think it's really crucial to involve students in the conversation and give them a voice in how it's performed, maybe how it's presented or contextualized to the audience. And I find that is helpful in addressing issues around historical music.
Yeah, of course, I'd also say there's more than one way to look at that question. There's one way would be, this music is attached to an ugly, dark past, so we should not do it. Or you could look at it like, this music is attached to an ugly, dark past, but I'm an artist and I can salvage something beautiful from that. And those are two different ways to look for it. And then yes, you contextualize and you inform and you educate yourself on what it is that you're teaching. And I love what Clelyn said about don't hide it from your kid, don't hide it from the kids, especially in the big 2-6. They will just look it up, right? They'll just look it up.
And I'll say this. This is what I've learned over the last few years. Well, first of all, I don't believe there's no such thing as a safe space. There's no space that's politically or religiously neutral. Right? So choir spaces are not neutral. Agreement is not required. It's not a requirement. Cooperation is. And so shared ref, shared rhythm. Because, these type of questions, because we could be all talking all day about these things. But again, I believe that there's no such thing as a neutral choir space. And agreement is not required, but cooperation is. That's what I'm saying about that. That's great.
All right. We're right up against time, so we appreciate everybody being here. I forgot the microphone. Thank you all for being here. And if you want to hear, of course, more unsafe conversations, then come check out the Choralosophy podcast. Several of these folks. Now I need to do an episode with Heather, who's the only one who does not have an episode on the show. Thank you, everybody, for coming and for listening. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of a conversation. If you are still hearing my voice, that means you're one of the MVPs, one of the diehards, one of the real ones, as the kids say. So if you are willing on the way out to check out a few different ways that you can help me continue to make this show high quality. One, use the promo code. That's the biggest one. At Sight Reading Factory, at mymusicfolders.com, at mychoirropes.com, at graphitepublishing.com, and endeavormusicpublishing.com. All of those take the Choralosophy checkout code, and of course now the newest one is 3-Minute Theory. You can get a 15% discount when you enter Choralosophy at checkout there. And of course, going to Apple Podcasts and leaving a positive review is very helpful there, and sharing the episodes to your colleagues in real life and on social media. All of those things are incredibly helpful and allow me to continue to create this resource for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.